And thank you very much again for taking time out of your busy schedule. Hold on. I'm just waiting on notification now. Perfect. Okay, boom. And we are live. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to a very special edition of Off the Record on the People's Podcast this afternoon. We have an incredible guest with us, one who's going to give us some powerful information as well as inspiration, and that is none other than the math professor, Mr. Akil Parker. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing well, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The honor is definitely mine. And on behalf of myself, my family, and the viewing audience of the People's Podcast, we want to just thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, and we look forward to the conversation that we're about to have. And thanks to everybody who's showing love in the comments on Facebook already, and I can't wait to put this on YouTube. Okay, the first question that we have, what makes you so passionate about math?
Well, I think I put up on Facebook when I realized like the political and like cultural, relationship between like mathematics, in terms of the Black community, and us excelling at mathematics in order to be able to solve our own problems, since nobody's coming to save us, right? Once I realized that from like studying, people like Dr. Jacob Carruthers, who wrote Intellectual Warfare, and within Intellectual Warfare, he was referencing a lot of Sheikh Anta Diop's work. And then I found out that Sheikh Anta Diop was actually not only a historian and a linguist, but a mathematician and a physicist as well. It really made a lot of connections for me. So back at that point in my career as a high school math teacher, it forced me to really take my position a lot more seriously, as opposed to just, the math teacher that's trying to, teach people how to solve equations and get my paycheck every 2 weeks, and have those summers off where I was, working in summer programs anyway. But it showed me like the much larger context of like why math is relevant. And, in terms of like, us being able to, have critical thinking skills, develop critical thinking skills. That's really what math does. It's not just about, being able to use y equals mx plus b, or a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It's not really just about that. It's about, developing and training your brain, to think in a certain way, to think systematically and in a methodical way so that we can solve problems. And that's really what math is really all about. A lot of times it's marketed in a certain way as if it's irrelevant. And I think that's done intentionally because, people are in a very different situation when they can understand the world through a mathematical lens. And when you can understand it through a mathematical lens, it's very easy for you to be taken advantage of, very easy for you to be exploited, especially in a capitalist society, which is rooted in exploitation.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Okay, brother. Yes, sir. All right. Now, I'm someone who grew up hearing, like many of my friends, and I'm someone who's in college now and about to graduate, God willing, very soon. And I'm on the road. My mother was heavy on college, so I'm gonna keep going to get multiple degrees. But I grew up like many of the male. My sisters went to college. The men are taught college isn't for everybody. What do you say to people who have been, especially us who've been taught that? What I'm saying? All my other races of friends, college, but we are taught college isn't for everybody. What do you say to people who preach that?
So I would hear about the magnitude of the circumstance when people say that, because I think it's more of an issue of a lack of preparation. Because I often, like in my experience with students, I've encountered a lot of students that for various reasons were not college ready, academically, so to speak. And, it kind of ends up being this like way to kind of make them feel better about the fact that they're not able to participate in a certain thing, which this thing being college. I have challenges with that phrase or with that statement that college isn't for everybody. Because a lot of times it's spoken in a way whereas there's not an alternative. It's just, well, some people are pushed toward college, and sometimes that's, the only option. And there should be several options that, young people have. Young people need various options. But a lot of times it's, well, I really didn't want to I didn't want to work hard, or I wasn't trained and socialized in a certain way to work hard academically on the middle school level and a high school level. So then I don't want to go to college and where, I have to pay money out of pocket or take out loans, to be in an academically rigorous space But then at the same time, there's no real viable alternative except I'm just going to stay in my mom's house and maybe get a job. And the question becomes, the idea, I guess, for a lot of people is that that would be an easier route. But then they find out, you know, after a year or so, that's not an easier route, you know. So when people say, you know, college isn't for everybody, I like to kind of unpack that. I always want to know like what their background is, and if it's not for you, okay, fine. But what is for you, you know? And I think a lot of people that say that, they don't have an answer for my follow-up question, which is, well, what is for you? Like, are you trying to, you know, do something entrepreneurial? And a lot of times what happens is when you start to really unpack that question, you know, with that person, a lot of the things that they say they want to do, college would actually be a good place to develop a skill set where they would be able to do that. Like a lot of people say, well, you know, I just want to be an entrepreneur. Okay, well, what type of business do you want to run? You know, I mean, I know a lot of people that are entrepreneurs now, myself being one of them. And a lot of the people in our own personal networks are people that we met in college, right? Or we developed certain skills on the college campus, or we took certain coursework in college. And maybe while we were taking that coursework, while we were in college, while we were, you know, 18, 19, 20 years old, we didn't really see the relevance. But now 15 years later, 20 years later, we're like, oh yeah, I'm glad I did take that information systems course. Cause like we learned all this stuff about, you know, Microsoft Access databases and Microsoft Excel and, you know, how to do these formulas. And now I'm running a business. I'm trying to just do some basic bookkeeping on my own. And all this stuff is coming in handy. It's coming in handy. It's very useful now. So, I mean, so yeah, to that question, I think we just have to consider like, well, you know, what is for you? If college is not for you, then what is for you? And a lot of times people don't have an answer for that. So a lot of times it ends up being a cop-out.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Yes, sir. And what advice would you give to someone, like I'm finished my math courses, praise God. But you know what I'm saying? People who are, the math is a challenge, right? Math is a challenge. What advice would you give to them in breaking down math?
I would say that probably they just haven't practiced enough. They haven't done enough problems. I think math has to be really approached like a kind of like sports, you know, where you have to like, you know, do those drills and those fundamentals over and over again on a regular and a daily basis. There's so many details and so many aspects and different parts of mathematics, and so many ways to get a problem wrong. And that's just part of the process. You know, we have to kind of like trust the process. Like we have to get those wrong answers so that we learn how not to do the problem. We got to, you know, remember, okay, don't forget that negative sign. You know, we got to know how to multiply positive numbers and negative numbers. There are all those different details. And I think that we just have to, a person has to decide for themselves that they would like to master it or like to at least become proficient in it. If for no other reason than to be able to help their children or to help their nieces and nephews or their grandchildren or whomever. Like I was at one point, I was teaching in a night school program for students that were non-traditional students. They were students that had previously like dropped out of Philadelphia public schools, and they were trying to get their diplomas. And I was, you know, on the first night of class, I always asked the question, like, why are you here? You know, because I want to know, I want to get a background, like, okay, well, where are you coming from? Like, are you trying to set an example for your children? Are you trying to, you know, kind of prove something to yourself? You know, and those are kind of like the typical answers, and those are fine. But one of the things that I would impress upon them is always like, when you're taking this geometry class with me, or when you're taking this algebra 2 course with me, or this algebra 1 course with me, or this consumer math course with me, I want you to be able to take these skills and use them to help your children with their homework. Just something very fundamental and basic that is lost on a lot of people because a lot of people don't have those algebra skills or those geometry skills. So it's kind of like your child comes home, your child's in high school, they come home and they got homework to do and they know they can't come to you as a resource. And I've always been, since I'm a math professional and a math teacher and a math professor, I've always been in a space of privilege where I've never had to deal with that anxiety of knowing that there's something that my child has to do that I can't really help them with. Right. So I want more people to be able to do that, which is why I created the All This Math YouTube channel. But what I would say to people is definitely, you know, make a decision that you want to learn math or at least increase your proficiency in math, because math is all around us. You know, it's in everything. I know that we live in a society where we're socialized to try to avoid math and have a fear of math, and that kind of fear, that phobia of math has become very acceptable and normalized. But, you know, so it's almost like you don't notice it, because it's like, well, it's almost like on some like, well, everybody's bad at math. So if I'm bad at math, then I'm fitting in with everybody else. But things change. The world starts to look a little different. You start to understand things that you see on social media, that you hear in the news, that you might see on YouTube. You start to, even conversations that people are having, you start to like really understand, like, that these things don't really add up, and that's a helpful thing. Like I said, because like I said earlier, we live in a society that's like rooted in exploitation, and,
Yes, sir.
the distinction between the haves and the have-nots.
Absolutely. Okay, great. And my sister Naima says, peace, family, peace, Naima. Your math YouTube channel, what grade is does it focus on, and can you give it to us so we can go to it?
Yeah, so if you go to and you type in the @ symbol and then all this math, like my sweatshirt, all this math. If you type that in, you'll see me in one of the videos. You can just click on it and subscribe, turn on the post notifications as well, because I'm regularly putting up content. I have videos with my daughter Assata already. I'm going to start doing some videos with my older son Nasim, who's 16. He's in high school, studying calculus right now. Assata is 9 years old, in the 4th grade, and so we do videos together. And I'm being intentional with the way I'm creating these videos, because I'm not only trying to show the young people how to understand certain content and certain topics, but I'm also trying to model for parents how they can teach their own children, and how they can assist their own children with their own homework. So that's another thing, that I'm doing with that.
That's amazing, sir. And I have a niece whose name is Assata as well. What made you decide to name your children such strong names?
Just reading. Like, I think before Assata was born, I had just read Assata, the autobiography of Assata Shakur. I was studying her, and she just, was one of my heroes. She was Bae. You know what
yes,
I mean?
Sir, yes, sir.
About 10 or 11 years ago, and then I had the opportunity to teach about her in class, and my youngest son is named Kwame. Kwame Ture is one of my intellectual heroes.
Yes,
one
sir.
of my
Yes,
favorite
sir.
revolutionaries.
Yes, sir.
I've learned so much from watching his lectures on DVD, and watching his YouTube lectures, and reading Black Power that he co-authored with Charles V. Hamilton, reading Stokely Speaks, book of speeches that are very relevant, as relevant as ever today. His autobiography, Ready for Revolution. Just really learning about these people and trying to carry on the tradition, by providing giving my children those names.
That's powerful.
Spirit,
Yes, sir. That's powerful. My grandparents, Leonard Carson Ball and Marion Ball, were very close friends with Kwame Ture, and his son. His son is in Atlanta. I see his son often. We always bump into his son, and shout out to Mr. Ture and their family. Strong revolutionaries. Yes, sir. Okay, my next question is, what has been your greatest trial as an educator? And how have you overcome that trial?
My greatest trial as an educator is having to come to terms with and grips with the fact that a lot of our young people are socialized in a certain way to be very anti-intellectual. And it's not that they're unintelligent, it's that they don't see the value, and they don't see the social, there's not as much social capital and cultural capital associated with formal education. And what I mean is that, the way that translates is in real time is, you have students that will come into class and they have no concern for what you're talking about. It's like, it's a geometry class, it's an algebra 2 class, pre-calculus class. And, a lot of students from, all across the nation, and a lot of people don't really talk about this because it makes the teacher look bad, because there's this concept of, classroom management, whereas like if these things are happening in the classroom, there's this idea that, well, you just have bad classroom management. And it's really not that simple at all. Students are just sitting in class, just totally disinterested, on their phones, or sleep, or having whole side conversations that have nothing to do with the content. And this even might happen when you're standing at the front of the class, standing in front of the class doing your direct instruction, not even on, independent practice time. So one of the challenges is to have to accept that reality and learn to, not go to war with every individual student, even though you want it for them, because you know the value of it. Like, the value of geometry, even if you're not able to thoroughly explain to them and get them, impress upon them what the value is for them in their own life, but that there's a value in it. So at some point, you got to stop going to war with them, because while you're going to war with them, the students that are socialized to see the value in it, they're missing out on the lesson. So early in my career, I was on some I want to quote unquote save everybody, and I say quote unquote, really not saving people. We just develop human beings, right? But as you get older, you realize it's kind of like with revolutionary work. It's like you got to deal with the people that are ready to go, and everybody can't go. And it sounds like disheartening to say that, because we're dealing with children, dealing with young people. But again, what do we sacrifice? If we put too much attention on those that we got to fight with, then those that are ready, they won't get the attention that they need. So that's definitely been difficult for me to come to terms with and have to come to grips with. But again, that's back to the YouTube channel. I think some of those young people that aren't ready, some of them at least, they just need like a different space and a different way to learn. Maybe while they're on their phone, or while they're at home on a tablet or on a laptop, maybe away from everybody else. A lot of times they lack fundamentals. They lack the proficiency in fundamentals that would enable them to do better in a classroom setting. So they need to be in another space where they can work on those fundamentals and get that like remediation, so hopefully the YouTube channel will, be able to, speak to that and, satisfy that need as well.
Yes, sir. Okay.
So then when they come back in
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was done.
Okay, yes, sir. And I'm saying we love to hear that and love to see that. Once again, I want to make sure that everybody who's watching the People's Podcast, thank you all for who like, share, and subscribe. Let's make sure we go to All Things Math on YouTube. All this. Okay, right. All this math on YouTube with math professor Akil Parker. Okay, what has been your greatest joy as an educator?
Seeing people learn, seeing young people learn, and like the relationships that you develop, with young people, and then seeing them after they've left your classroom, just grow, as adults, and just thriving and successful, human beings, and having their own families, having their own children, and then shouting you out, and letting you know, like I remember when you told us this class, and I'm like, man, I don't remember saying that, but it sounds good. I'm glad I told y'all that. I'm glad I said it. I'm glad you remembered it. Because a lot of times, like as a teacher, when you're in the classroom and you're having these conversations and you're trying to, you're giving guidance and you're giving life lessons. A lot of it is, it's for the student benefit, but a lot of times it's kind of therapeutic, because you're reflecting on your own life and your own, mistakes that you've made, and failures that you've had in the past. And you're like, it's a way to process them. You're having conversations about that. And, and then in the hopes that, maybe they won't have to go through something that you went through, or at least they'll consider that, well, this was an outcome for me when I was in that situation, and when I approached the situation in this way. So at least keep that in mind now that you're going down this path. Even if you don't follow, what I did, or follow my advice right now, at least I'm giving you, a potential outcome that you can add into the mix, in your decision-making process.
Man, we love to see it, sir. And my sister Naima says, all this math and quotation mark on YouTube. She's about to subscribe. And I can't wait to put this on YouTube so everybody can make sure that we support. There was a math teacher. He's known by, he's all over Chicago, but all over the country. He calls himself the math doctor. He's known as the math doctor, named Shahid Muhammad. And he was very instrumental in my education, because math always gave me challenges. So shout out to all of the educators. Now that I'm going to school for history, I'll be teaching history, but as an educator, I just have an appreciation for teachers in general, especially male teachers, but especially those who teach courses that are considered challenging. You know what I'm saying? So shout out to you, brother, for holding it down in a math class, attempting to, man, that's a beautiful challenge, brother. And we support you. And the People's Podcast is yours. Anytime you want to come back to let us know anything that you're working on. My next question for you is, you spoke about your children. What advice would you give to future fathers?
Learn how to children. Learn how to center your children. Also, deal with childhood traumas that you've had, that may influence your own parenting. Be honest with yourself. about, you know, what was right, what wasn't right, what worked, what didn't work. Also consider that some things that did work in the context of your own upbringing may not work in the context of your children's upbringing. Maybe you were brought up in, you know, a two-parent household, nuclear family, but now you're in a co-parenting situation. So maybe that approach that was successful for you as a child in that scenario won't be as successful, for your children in a different scenario. And just realize that, every day you're learning, every day you're trying to improve on things, and you're going to make mistakes. And also be willing to apologize to your children when you make those mistakes. When you yell, when you feel like, when you realize, damn, I shouldn't have yelled. I didn't need to yell at her for that. I didn't need to yell at him for that. I didn't need to come at him like that. Own the fact that, you may have some frustration coming from another area in your own life. And basically now, like, you're using, your child as like this kind of like emotional punching bag, and like, let them know, like, be very transparent and let them know, like, bro, like, I shouldn't have talked to you like that. That was not okay. And even let them know why, that's some of my advice. That's the type of parent that I've kind of developed into in the past 16 years. I try to just be real honest, with my children, and let them know, when I've messed up. And I think it's very key to let them know and be very, very transparent about failures, because again, like, I want them to know that, like, I didn't do this right, because if they don't know that it was a failure, they may remember that you did it and then try to emulate it because you did it. But when I say, well, it was a failure for me doing it, like, I shouldn't have actually done that, then they can say, well, whoa, okay, he made it look good, but nah, that wasn't cool. Like, and sometimes as a child, you don't really pick up on that. Some children may pick up on it, but other children don't pick up on it. Like, a lot of the things that, my parents did, I just thought, okay, well, they did it, so it must have been right. But I try to be more explicit, like, with my children, and like, let them know. And again, it's just like similar to like having those kind of like, those serious conversations, those open conversations with students in your classroom. It's therapeutic, because you're kind of working through your own personal issues and you're processing them. And you're really like, kind of letting your children know, like, yeah, this is something I should have done differently. After I reflected on it, after I processed, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. That wasn't the best thing for me to do. So it's kind of like, we're growing together. Like, I've been in educational spaces where I've grown with my students, and like, in the past 16 years as a parent, I've grown with my children.
That's beautiful, sir. And once again, thank you for your honesty, your transparency, and thank everybody who continues to like, share, subscribe to the People's Podcast. Where can we find you on social media, especially the young men who are looking for role models, looking for people to? One of my teachers, I mean, man, from high school, I'm still cool with him to this day, because he was, because of, I needed a mentor. You know what I'm saying? I didn't understand it back then, but as we, I got grown, and I'm like, yo, thank you for this. Thank you for that. Where can he reach out to you on social media?
So on social media, like, you can hit me up on Instagram at All This Math, the same name, All This Math. Also on Facebook at All This Math. I have a Twitter as well by the same name. I haven't really started using that Twitter account. I will become more active in 2022 on Twitter, though, in terms of like marketing. But yeah, definitely just reach out to me at All This Math. And another thing we're trying to do in terms of like finding mentorship with All This Math, I'm in the process of really like trying to develop like a cohort, like a strong cohort of Black men and women that are focused on in mathematics and in the STEM fields, because if it's kind of like what Malcolm, one of the many great things Malcolm X said is like, if you believe you haven't done anything, you won't be able to do anything. So part of that is marketing and imagery. So if we don't think that we're mathematicians, we don't think that we're scientists, we're not going to think that we can be mathematicians and we can be scientists. But we got to show that, we got to show that. So like, we're often shown only as rappers, singers, comedians, people that shuck and jive and dance and all those types of things. So we think that that's what we're supposed to do, or be athletes. We think that those are the only things we're supposed to do. But there are a lot of other things that we already actually are doing and should be doing. Like being mathematicians, being math teachers, being physicists, being physics teachers. We just have to show that, you know? So, you know, that's the responsibility of people like myself to really step it up with the marketing, you know, and step it up with, you know, with promoting that imagery, you know, to kind of like balance things out, you know? So, yeah, so that's another reason.
Yes, sir.
Come to the social media, and you'll end up being connected and seeing, like, you know, you might see something on my page where I'm tagged in connection with some other Black mathematicians, some other Black STEM professionals, you know, and that's just good. It's a community, you know. I'm really trying to build community. This is not just about me as an individual, you know. I like to think I'm doing my individual part, you know, to create something much greater than myself, and that really involves like creating like a, you know, like I said, a cohort, or, you know, a collective of Black people that are heavy into mathematics and science, so that we can you know, use mathematics as a tool to solve our problems, you know.
That's phenomenal, man. We supporting you. I just interviewed my cousin, who's a principal. Man, I know so many. So I want to make sure that we connect you all with each other and with one another, to continue to show these positive images. So I have a question. So do you mean to tell me that to the young men specifically, because women 9 times out of 10 they're gonna go to college and, you know, be straight majority of the time, but with the young Black men specifically, do you mean to tell me that they have a higher chance of becoming a mathematician or using math in real life than making it to the NFL or getting signed by a record label?
They definitely do. They definitely do, and there's plenty of empirical data to show that. So they definitely have a higher chance. But again, with, you know, with marketing, when there's such a high concentration of those specific images, you would think otherwise. But again, you know, the numbers don't lie. So,
yes,
yeah,
sir.
And I think another thing too, to revert back to one of your earlier questions about college not being for everybody, I don't know how often it is that a person that excels at mathematics through middle school and through high school ever utters those words out of their own mouth. College isn't for them, because when you have that preparation for college, I mean, sure, somebody could decide, well, you know what, I have college scholarships on the table, I got all these acceptance letters, but you know what, I want to take another route. That can happen, but see, that's when you have options. That's called exercising an option. A lot of times when people make that statement that college isn't for everybody, it's that, well, you know, that wasn't an option for them, or it would have been very challenging just to put themselves in that position to be enrolled in a college. But that's kind of like that should be the responsibility of the community. It's not really the fault of the child or the high school senior at that moment. The community has to make that investment and to develop these young people from early on, you know, and not even wait until high school. Like, you know, my son Kwame is 2 years old. You know, he's being developed right now for a long-term plan, right? So that he can develop certain skills so that he'll be able to serve his community, you know, with those skills, right? So yeah, so, you know, the whole, you know, we want to provide, you know, training and development, you know, especially in mathematics. That's one of the ways that, you know, we're lacking. We didn't even get a chance to talk about hystematics. Hystematics is you brought up, you know, my children's names, and like people like Assata, Shakur, and Kwame Ture. Hystematics is a kind of a framework that I've developed and kind of formalized over the last couple of years, where I combine history with mathematics, but in a meaningful way. You know, in a very meaningful way. 5 elements where I break that down, and you know, and it really was an outgrowth of me just being in my math classes, and you know, whether it was geometry or a statistics class, and you know, I wanted to have a conversation about Kwame Ture. I wanted to have a conversation about this speech from Stokely Speaks that I read that resonated with me, because I'm like, okay, he's talking about this in like 1968, but yet this issue is going on right now here in the United States in 2018. So
right.
you're able to have this conversation, and actually what he's talking about and his analysis. Anytime you do any analysis, you're doing mathematical analysis, whether you realize it or not.
Yes,
right?
Sir.
Like you're assessing a situation in a certain way. So there's a direct connection, you know, between a lot of, you know, historical realities and mathematics, and the processes and the procedures within mathematics can be applied to that type of historical analysis, and to political science, and to cultural studies, and all these types of things. So that's why I created this other framework called hystematics that I'm going to be actually publishing a book on in the coming year. You know, because I'm trying to be all about, you know, problem solving, because like we're long on identification of problems, but we're short on solutions. And everybody's not, and I also realize that everybody's not meant to be a problem solver, or at least at particular points in time. Like even in the classroom, like you may call on a certain student to read the problem out loud, right? But that student may not be equipped at going to the board and actually writing the equation up and then solving the equation. Some other students may have that ability at that particular point in time. You want at some point for everybody to get to that point where everybody can be a problem solver, but everybody's not really a problem solver. So you might need some people to just make the complaint, because complaints are valuable, right? Or to let us know, or to be like an alarmist to let us know, oh, this is going on in the community, or that's going on. And then it might be the responsibility of some other people to say, okay, well, boom, here go the solution. Now I'm coming with the solution, right? And we can all kind of work together in that way. So I saw that, we have deficiencies in mathematics. We have deficiencies in our historical awareness, which also is a reason that we often get taken advantage of, because a lot of times we see something and like, we think it's brand new. We think it's the first time that it's happened, but it's like, nah, they've been doing this like for the last 50 years, or when the conditions were like this before this happened. So all we got to do is understand the history, then we can see the patterns, and then we can know how to respond. And we also will know, well, this is how our people responded in the past, and this was the outcome. So then we can use that information, think critically about it, and then think, okay, well, what should we do this time? So now it's coming back around. But when we're historically, when we're ahistorical and we don't know the history, and we also don't know how to do analysis, because we also don't know, we don't have critical thinking ability, because we lack math skills, right? We don't approach the world mathematically, then we're just lost. Because like every time something's happening, we're acting like we got to reinvent the wheel, and we're just like, we're blindsided, every time. So that's one of the reasons why we keep losing. So again, my belief is that, mathematical competency can, be a solution, to a lot of our problems in the community.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on the People's Podcast today. You've given us some amazing information as well as inspiration. It's been my honor to connect with you, sir. I want everybody to make sure that we show love to All This Math and Professor Akil Parker on YouTube, on social media. Let's make sure we reach out. Once again, now that we connected, anytime you want to come on, any other professors, positive role models that you want to bring on, man, the platform is yours. It's the People's Podcast. Thank everybody who's watching. This is Joshua Leonard Muhammad signing off for the People's Podcast. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.